Tamang kaalaman tungo sa malayang kaisipan. Ako po si Ferdy Isleta.
Ang kultura ay susi sa kadakilaan. Ako po si Annie Luis.
Isang oras ng ang kailangan. Ako po si Renena Peñas at ito ang
Padayon Presents the NCCA Hour. Sulong na!
Padayon, the NCCA Hour. Sulong na!
Sining, na siyang pangunahing daluyan ng ekspresyon ng isang artista, ay siya ring parehong agusan ng galing at henyong kaisipan na may kakayahang pumukaw sa damdamin ng mga tumatangkilik, maging ng mga pangkaraniwang tao. Ngunit, ang dakilang sining ng isang artistang Filipino na may tunay na pagpapahalaga at pagmamahal sa kanyang kakanyahan ay isang sining na may kapangyarihang lumikha ng portal mula sa iba't ibang panahon, sisidlan ng kasaysayan at mga tradisyon ng lahi, at isang pamanang kayamanan na habang buhay na magbibigay dangal sa Filipinong kalinangan. Ito ang kapangyarihan ng sining ni Leonor Orosa Goquinco. Taong 1976 noong ika-27 ng Marso, iginawad kay Leonor Orosa Goquinco ang pinakamataas na parangal at pagkilala sa bansa, ang gawad ng Pambansang Alagad ng Sining, para sa kanyang makahalagang ambag sa pagsasaliksik, paglilinang, at pagpapayaman sa larangan ng sayaw ng kulturang Filipino.
Si Mrs. Goquinco, ang napakalaki ng kanyang contribution sa Philippine culture sapagkat siya yung isa sa mga pioneers na talaga nakapagpalabas ng sayaw on an international level and on a local level na talagang may Pilipinong tema, and successfully so.
She was able to put into a more holistic concept about our culture. And this is therefore the gift of the provinciano, I think, that people who grew up in the capital don't always have. And it is an orientation that gives her work particular uniqueness and individuality into her to dance.
Hindi ko pa nakita yung konsepto na ganitong ginawa mula sa umpisa. At nandiyan na lahat ng elemento ng teatro. Kwento ng bahagi nito, yung suites kung tawagin, nasa mga kasuotan, nasa musikang ginamit, at nasa pagsasaayos ng galaw o koreografiya. 15 anyos pa lang ako nito nun eh. Sabi ko, saan nang galing ito? Abay, kaganda. At gawang Pilipino.
Yun ang maganda kay Tita Leonor. Yung mga iba-ibang pyesa, kanya-kanyang style. So she would harness it from folk dance. Talagang yun ang basehan niya, yung ating katutubong mga sayaw. So depende doon sa konteksto ng sayaw. Pero yung klaro sa kanya is kung paano niya babaliin, alam mo yun, kung paano niya gawin theatrical form yun. Yun very clear sa kanya, yun yung kanyang aesthetics.
Isang bailarina, koreograpo, at isa ring manunulat, si Leonor Orosa Goquinco ay isinilang noong ika-24 ng Hunyo taong 1917 sa Hulo-Sulu kina Sixto Orosa at Severina Luna na kapwa-doktor. Dahil sa likas na uri ng panunungkulan ng kanyang mga magulang, palipat-lipat ang mag-anak sa iba't ibang panig ng bansa. Nag-aral si Leonor ng elementary at high school sa mga paaralan ng iba't ibang probinsya. Para sa kolehiyo, nag-umpisa si Leonor sa Philippine Women's College at tinapos ang kanyang huling 2 taon sa St. Scholastica's. Nagtapos si Leonor Orosa ng BS Education bilang summa cum laude, ngunit ibang karera ang kanyang piniling tahakin. Pagpipinta, pagtugtog ng piano, pagsusulat ng mga tula. Bukod sa pagiging brilyong mag-aaral, puno ng talento at kahusayan si Leonor. Sa kanyang kabataan, siya ay nangunguna na bilang mananayaw at koreograpo. Anumang bagay ang kanyang nais matutunan at pasukin, ay buong husay niya itong inaangkin.
Tulad sa pagsusulat niya, nakakita siya ng isang bagay, nakakapagbigay siya ng malalim na analysis. For dance, hindi lang yun spatial awareness, choreographic awareness, but also thematic awareness. So, ang dance kasi nagkakaroon din siya ng aspeto ng literatura. Parang sinusulat mo yung sayaw, no? So, siguro yung pagiging writer niya at pagiging choreographer niya ay malilink mo din. Kasi nga, ang choreografiya ay hindi lamang parang abstract sculpture, pwede rin siyang maging narrative sculpture.
I think yung passion niya na magsulat tungkol sa sayaw, malaking bagay yun eh. Kasi konti lang yung artist talaga na marunong magsulat tungkol sa art form at ganun kalawak ang paningin. I would venture to say na parang it's her advocacy to popularize dance, to let people know more about the art form.
Si Leonor Orosa Goquinco, artistic director and choreographer yan, pero yung storyline, yung libreto, siyang pasumulat. At karamihan ng musika, kung hindi niya pinagkatagnit-tagnit sa kung saan nanggagaling, siya rin na nagko-compose. Ang ginagawa niya ay parang kumakanta ng effect and then pinapapiano niya and then pinapasulat niya.
12 taong gulang siya nang kanyang unang mapanood ang balyarinang Ruso na si Olga Dontsov sa pagtatanghal nito sa Bacolod. Dahil sa paghanga, nakiusap siya sa kanyang ama na siya ay pag-aralin ng ballet. Di nagtagal, sumailalim siya kay Lilia Lopez, Mrs. Frank Hison sa Iloilo, at nagpatuloy siya sa kolehiyo sa ilalim ni Madam Luva Adamate.
Dance encompasses all the art forms eh. So it is sculpture, it is music. I think she came from a very musically trained family. Tama-tama yung sayo kasi it can embrace all the other art forms eh.
In some ways, he was the early anthropologist in dance, which often enough was not even existed before that kind of work, anthropology sa sayaw. So marami siyang talagang konsepto, malawak ang pag-iisip niya.
Matapos sa kolehiyo, kinumisyon siya ng UST College of Liberal Arts na gumawa ng isang dramang sayaw, ang Vinta. 1938, na itinanghal at isinayaw ng mga mag-aaral ng kolehiyo ang kanyang Circling the Globe taong 1939, ang kanyang unang pagtatanghal bilang koreograpo sa St. Scholastica's, kung saan siya'y kinausap ng mga madre upang magturo ng ballet sa mga estudyante. Taong 1940, itinayo ni Leonor Orosa ang kanyang sariling estudyo ng ballet sa Maynila, ang Philippine Ballet Theater and Dance Repertory. Ngunit pagkalipas ng ikalawang digmaang pandaigdig, nagdesisyon ang mga magulang ni Leonor na mangibang bansa. Sa Estados Unidos, nag-aral muli ang magkakapatid na Orosa. Kumuha ng mga kurso sa teatro, drama at musika si Leonor sa Columbia University sa New York. Maging sa ibang bansa, isang makinang na estrelya si Leonor kung saan siya ay parati ring naiimbitahang magtanghal. Dito kanyang nakilala si Benjamin Goquinco, ang kanyang mapapangasawa. Nang siya'y manumbalik sa Pilipinas, kanyang muling binuksan ang kanyang estudyo ng ballet sa Maynila habang siya'y nagtuturo ng drama sa PWU at nagko-choreograpo sa iba't ibang malalaking pagtatanghal.
Ano siya, very passionate. Pag nakita niya matigas yung kamay mo, papaluin niya yun eh. Talagang, no, ganun minagdaan, dapat malambot. Ganun siya ka-passionate.
Ako, pinapalo yung kamay ko kasi nakalabas yung palm, yung dapat graceful yung paghawak. Lagi niyang kinokorek yung tinatawag nilang port de bras, yung sasayaw, yung pag-carriage of the arms.
Number one, Mrs. Goquinco is such a perfectionist, but she's not tyrannical. She's not bossy. She was always, you would call a lady, and she'll just tell me, Bella, ayoko no, not that one. Never raising her voice na you're going to get so intimidated because she's Leonor Orosa and she's screaming at you. Never. I never encountered that.
Alam naman kasi niya na karamihan sa amin, ala naman ka-background sa ballet o sa anumang formal na pagtuturo sa sayaw. Kaya very patient, talaga pasensyosa. At saka alam na alam niya ang kanyang ginagawa. Alam na alam niya na kung hindi mo kaya, ano muna ang level na papayagan niyang gawin mo hanggang sa makuha mo rin.
Sa loob ng maraming taon, maraming di malilimutang pagtatanghal ang ihinandog ni Leonor Orosa Goquinco bilang mananayaw at koreograpo sa iba't ibang entablado. Mula sa sariling bayan hanggang sa ibang bansa, ang kanyang kakaibang husay, bisyon at galing bilang koreograpo ay nagpaunlad sa estilo ng maraming tradisyonal na sayaw ng Pilipinas at nagbigay inobasyon sa anyo ng pagtatanghal.
Naalala ko, napanood ko yon sa Philippinescas. Igorot sweet ata yun. Umiikot sila sa stage, non-stop, very virtuoso na nagpapalapakan yung mga tao kasi very virtuoso yung ginagawa nila, ang hirap.
When you're doing something like a suite, in the dancing, you have the beat and the steps that she did, which was both balletic and folkloric.
Tapos naalala ko yung parang tinikling na parang may babae na naka-toe shoes ballet. Tapos nagtitikling na ang bilis-bilis. Ang ganda. Very technical, very virtuoso.
Pati kaya nga nun eh. Yung nakikita na yung double time climax ng tinikling na yan. Hindi ba tinikling? Siya naman na nag-umpisa niya.
One of our most famous dances yung Maria Clara Suite. Tungkol kay Maria Clara sa mga characters ni Rizal. At according to the account, sinahalo niya yung Filipino folk dances with ballet, no, na on-point shoes.
Yung Philippinescas, Philippine dance legend and lore. Pero may pinasok sa yung mga part ng early work niya, like 2 or 3 sections from her Loli Dance Suite. Siya gumawa ng sections ng Loling Itanghire, si Elias at saka Salome, Maria Clara and the Leper, a salto for San Maria Clara.
Ang pinaka-focus dyan, pinaka-climax dyan, yung sabong, pintakasi. Ako'y ginawang puting tandang. Ay, yung pulang tandang naman yung aking naging kumpare na si Ray Limcaco. So, kami naglaro, pero mahigit 500 ko yata sinayaw yan. Minsan hindi ako nanalo.
Ang Philippinesca Dance Company na itinayo ni Leonor Orosa Goquinco taong 1958 ay naging bantog at umani ng maraming papuri sa loob ng kanilang 16 na taong paglalakbay sa iba't ibang bansa at pagtatanghal sa iba't ibang entablado.
Ang Pilipinescas, yes, we are performing folk dance, but may halong ballet and folk. Meron pa kami mga Sienda Sky, tapos nagmi-mission. Merong mga Igorot dances, may mga yung Tagalog dances, yung mga Visayas, hanggang sa mauuwi sa Muslim. Meron siya mga ginagawa mga mix of folk dance into classical dancing. Kaya ang ganda, very creative ang mind niya, really genius.
So ang training mo dyan, sayaw, musika, at yung tinatawag natin mime acting. Or sayaw na padula. Or sayaw sa katahimikan. Or sayaw na teatro. O theater dance kung tawagin.
Madetalya siya eh. So, stricta siya in that sense. Kasi klaro sa kanya yung vision niya. Yun yung magsistay sa'yo. Alam niya kung anong ginagawa niya.
The fact that she came in at that time with a new genre, because we just did whatever folk and we did whatever was classical, and she went above that and put together her own creation. And so I feel that is her biggest contribution. Her genius is her contribution.
Wala pa akong nakitang programa sa buong mundo na naglalagay sa 2 oras ng buhay, alamat, kultura ng Pilipinas sa loob ng 2 oras.
Dahil sa kanyang buong pusong pagtataguyod ng mga katutubong sayaw na siyang naging muho ng sining sa larangan ng sayaw at sumasalamin sa tunay na ganda ng kulturang Filipino, tumanggap si Leonor ng samot-saring parangal.
Yung Filipinescas, yung grupo niya, came at a certain point na all forces coming together, that there was much attention on Filipino folk dance. And the theatrical element of it, she was able to add. So parang, I think she talagang hit yung Filipinescas abroad.
If you're a Filipino living abroad and you would see that show and you will be proud as a Filipino.
Her advocacy in life is really about dance. That it speaks about Philippine culture.
She's a genius and an enigma at the same time. That's how I feel. She's an artist par excellence.
Isang malaking legacy sa atin ni Leonor na ang kanyang sayaw na bagamat merong impluwensya ng ballet na very western ay binalik niya sa Pilipinas sa pamaraan ng mga tema at mga kwento na tinatalakay niya.
Yun nga ang kanyang ginawa. Sa kabila ng kanyang paghihirap, kailangan kong ipagpatuloy ito, Edro. Ang salitang ginamit niya ay compulsion. It's a compulsion. I just have to do it. Para sa kanya, ito ay isang misyon na may lalim sa usapin ng spiritual. Binigyan siya ng may likha, ng maraming abilidad, at inisip niya na kailangan niyang ibahagi itong abilidad na ito. Matigas ang ulo. Compulsion eh. She just had to do it. Feeling niya, kung hindi ko gagawin ito, anong mangyayari sa kulturang Pilipino, sa sayo Pilipino?
Binansagang Mother of Philippine Theater Dance at Dean of Filipino Performing Arts Critics, si Pambansang Alagad ng Sining, Leonor Orosa Goquinco, ay tunay na henyo na di lamang naglatag ng daan sa ibayong pag-unlad ng Filipinong sayaw, kundi pati isang tunay na alagad ng kultura na may malalim na pagmamahal sa kanyang sining at pag-ibig sa kanyang bayang sinilangan.
She really spent the last few years of her life being an advocate for the arts by reviewing and encouraging young artists.
Tatatak sa'yo yun eh, yung passion niya to learn miski na matandaan na siya.
Hindi siguro ako nagkakamali kung sasabihin ko na sa lahat ng mga malilikha ng bayan natin, national artist natin, siya na pinaka-versatile.
Leonor Orosa Goquinco, Pambansang Alagad ng Sining, Sagisag Kultura ng Pilipinas.
Filipino, lahing matapang, lahing matalino, nalakbay ko ng mundo.
Walang unos o bagyo sa aki gugupo, lahi ng matatag. Ako ay Filipino.
Ako ay Filipino.
Ako'y makadiyos.
Ako ay Filipino.
Ako'y makatao. Saan man makarating, sino mang makapiling.
Aangat ang galing habang buhay, Filipino.
Tumpipot sandaang mga isla, magkakahiwalay ngunit nagkakaisa. Tahanan ng aming lahi, mga pook na aming ninimithi.
Puno ng kasaysayan, puno ng hiwaga. Sa mga lugar na ito nakatanim ang ugat ng pagka-Pilipino. Ako ay Filipino. Ako'y makadiyos. Ako ay Filipino. Ako'y makatao. Saan man makarating, sino mang makapiling. Aangat ang galing habang buhay, Filipino.
Kami ang lahing kayumanggi mula sa bughaw na langit at dagat. Mula sa pulang animoy dugo, hinalo sa dilaw na araw at bituin.
Yan ang kulay ng katatagan, yan ang kulay ng kagitingan, uungkapang na sumisigaw. Yan ang Pilipino. Ako ay Filipino. Ako'y makadiyos. Ako ay Filipino.
From the simplest to the rarest of materials, from the barks and fibers of plants to the densest of hardwood, from paper and clay and precious metals to that most wondrous substance, a mind in flight, expressing itself in a torrent of words. These are the materials from which our traditional artisans and craftsmen have built solid and grounded traditions. Fragments of a nation waiting to be made whole. By men and women who bring an entire culture and knowledge system into their creations. These are the chosen materials of our indigenous craftsmen. They who are the embodiment of Dayaw, our knowledge, our pride. It is part of human nature, this fascination and obsession with precious materials, from the gold that our ancestors used to adorn themselves, the silver with which we adorned our Catholic altars, the ivories that were carved into objects of veneration. In our continuing exploration of the materials from which visions of a nation are born, we look at all that glitters and attracts us. What do we find? Beyond these precious metals and treasured materials is an ancient skill, a genius for creating beauty. In a previous episode from the past season, we examined the Ayala Museum's collection of pre-Hispanic gold artifacts. This comprehensive collection is made all the more important by the range of forms and object types: earrings, pendants, necklaces, belts, and other forms of personal adornment, objects used both in ritual as well as in everyday life. The collection's range also covers the many techniques used in creating these pieces.
from richly embossed pieces to thinly beaten sheets, from pieces woven from gold wire or embellished with granulated beads, to more elaborate pieces like this bandolier that combined many techniques integrated into an important ritual accessory. The range covers not only the object types and the techniques used, it also covers the many areas in the Philippines from where these were excavated. From Surigao and Butuan, Laguna and Bicol, Pangasinan and the Cordillera. The range of origins shows us just how widespread the gold culture was in the Philippines. Ramon Villegas, gallerist, Filipiniana scholar, shares his knowledge of our gold tradition.
Siguro curious lang sila una, nakikita nila yung piraso ng metal na kumikinang-kinang sa batis, Kumuha sila ng piraso. Siguro meron silang yung apoy, nakikita nila kung ano nangyayari sa gold, natutunaw. Tapos yung isang bata doon, walang magawa, pinukpok niya. May formang lumalabas, Tapos hinanap nila yung material na yun and further experimentation through hundreds of years, natuto sila what you can do with it. Yun yung teorya na lahat ng bagay can be discovered independently. Of course, nag-trade din tayo, malawak nga yung trade natin at travel even before the foreigners came. Yung Pilipino na nagpunta sa India o nagpunta sa ibang parte ng Southeast Asia, nakita nila yung ginagawa dun sa ginto sa ibang bansa, kinokopya nila, dinedevelop nila yung karunungan na yon hanggat sa nag-develop tayo ng sarili nating kaalaman. Every region developed separately and every region had a particular need for development of the jewelry tradition. Yung mga Pilipino simulat sapol were great travelers. Hindi talaga totoo na na-discover tayo. Matagal na tayong nakadiscover sa mundo. So, lahat ng klase ng influensya napapasok na dito pagdating ng Kastila. Ang isang example niyan, may mga klase ng jewelry na sinasabi ng iba, dala daw ng Kastila. Hindi totoo yun, Kasi dito talaga nag-develop yung design at yung Kastila ang natuto sa atin.
The tradition of working precious metals into objects both functional and beautiful is still very much alive today. Among the Tiboli and other highland groups in Mindanao, metal casting was considered a gift of the gods. They specialized in the lost wax technique. One of the few metal workers who has kept the lost wax technique alive is Farabundos, a Tiboli craftsman who works in Lake Cebu. He learned the craft from his father. Today, his small workshop in Lake Cebu turns out souvenir items and accessories. The lost wax technique starts when a wax model of the desired objects is created. The wax model is then encased in a block of sand and soil. The block is then fired to harden the mold, while the original wax object melts away. What is left is a solid mold, which can withstand the molten metal that has replaced the lost wax. When the mold is destroyed, the object is cooled and then polished. In the Maranao village of Tugaya, other methods of metal working are still practiced and constantly refined. Brass vessels, kris, musical instruments like a gong, as well as other decorative objects, all show the metal working skill that survives today. a manifestation of a proud tradition began in pre-colonial times.
It may strike some as ironic that a faith devoted to humility and simplicity would have so many precious gold and silver objects created to celebrate devotion. But in many ways, these precious adornments also point to a nation that was opening up, not just to a new faith, but to a world of new influences. Influences that our skilled artisans reinterpreted and made their own.
Yung pagpukpok kasi, pwede mong pukpukin yung metal hanggat manipis. Tapos pag manipis na yan, pwede mong trabahuhin mula sa ilalim at mula sa ibabaw. So, may pwede kang gawing disenyo by working a piece of metal yung itaas at ibaba. No? Yun ang isang technique. Yung isang technique pa rin is yung paggawa ng mga kawad, yung wire. So, yung isang piraso ng ginto, pwede mong pukpukin, gagawin mong diretsong ganyan, parang kawad, tapos iro-roll mo sa isang malaking bato na bilog, gano'n, ano, magiging bilog na yun. Tapos pag hinila-hila mo yon, hahaba yun. Ano? Theoretically, yung isang gramo ng ginto, pwede mong hilahin lang kung ilang kilometro, no? Dahil sa quality ng ginto na pwede mong hilahin na gano'n. So, yun ang isang technique. Ano? Yung isa pang technique na ginagamit sa mga antigong alas na Pilipino, yung filigree. No? So, yung filigree naman, kombinasyon ng kawad, filium, no? At saka granum, yung butil. So, pag tinignan mo yung ibang mga trabaho na antigo, merong kawad at saka grano. No? So, yung filigree yun. Pag na-combine mo yung mga technique na yan, kakaiba yung nagagawa mong obra. No? Yung designs kasi nagbabago yan through the years. May mga moda-moda. Nagbabago talaga. Pero pag pinag-aralan mo yung techniques, nandun pinagpapatuloy. Tapos, in fact, pag tinignan mo yung mga bagong production ngayon, yung pa rin pinakamabenta, yung mga technique na kumbaga reaches into the roots of the Filipino psyche. No?
In the San Agustin Museum, there are many magnificent examples of precious metals used as sacramental objects. Gold and silver used in the sacrifice of the Mass, all for the greater glory of God. While some pieces are undoubtedly imported from Spain or Mexico, the majority were designed and crafted by Filipino metal workers.
Nangyari sa Pilipinas noon, yung pangsuporta sa kolonisasyon ng Pilipinas came in the form of silver coins. Yung silver coins galing sa Mexico at Peru. So dadating yung coins na sa galleon, may nagsasabi na kumisan inaabot ng 2 million pieces, yung sa isang barko 2 million pieces ng pieces of 8, Yung iba nun, binibigay ng hari sa paggagawa ng mga simbahan. So pag bigay mo naman nung pilak na yon, yung perang pilak sa mga pare, ang isang ginagawa nila dun sa pilak, ginagawa nilang pang dekorasyon sa simbahan. So pagka medyo maganda yung dating nung pera from Mexico at Spain, gagawa sila ng napakalaking mga altar,
The days of magnificent altar frontals made from solid beaten silver may be over. But the art of creating altar furniture from sheets of metal, using the methods perfected by past artisans is kept alive today. Eddie Mutok of Pampanga has been awarded the honor of Gawad Manlilikha ng Bayan for keeping alive the art of metalworking. His specialty is ecclesiastical objects, ranging from carrozza panels to altar frontals. The patterns are designed by Mutok himself, based on old examples that he has seen. These drawings are then translated into wooden carvings upon which the metal sheets are beaten. Here he demonstrates the basic techniques that his workshop specializes in.
Gagawa ka ng pattern. Sa kahoy mo muna iguguhit. At pagka guhit ng pattern, yun namang molde ang gagawin mo. Pagkayari ng molde, yun namang yellow brush ang susunod mo para lumitaw yung design. Pupupuin yun. Pagkalitaw ng design, sa saing na naman ang lagay. Bubuhayin mo na naman yung design para na-finish na. Pagka-finish ng design, itutubog mo na naman sa silver. Pagka kuha sa silver, gagawa ka naman yung pinaka-frame. Nung magmula nung ma-reward nga ako sa Gamaba, nakilala yung gawa kong mga metal. Yung nagpapagawa nga, natutuwa sa ginagawa kong ganyan. Kaya dumadami yung nagpapagawa.
In the work of Eddie Mutok, the tradition of craftsmanship for the greater glory of the faith is passed on to younger artisans. In the work of anonymous craftsmen from different indigenous groups, we see how these traditions are far more ancient and serve the purposes of a different spirituality. The creative impulse, the technologies, the trade secrets, and shared knowledge may come from different cultures, may serve different purposes. But in the end, each object speaks for a whole and integrated spirituality, manifested in a craftsmanship that continues to be honed today.
Wildlife conservation is such a pressing issue that we all rightfully should be concerned about, especially with regards to the use of animal parts for adornment. As filtered through our own sensibilities, the use of ivory and animal parts may seem almost barbaric. What justification could there have been for our ancestors living in times when resources were more plentiful?
More than just elements that beautify or add prestige, animal parts are considered power sources that contain the spiritual essence of the animal. Many accessories of indigenous peoples incorporate parts of animals considered totemic or spiritually powerful. For example, among the Ilonggot of Nueva Vizcaya, the skull and beak of the hornbill are considered the potent source of the power that was much valued by a tradition headhunting society. Mounted on a fiber frame and worn on the head, the projecting beak and skull were the mark of an accomplished headhunter. In colonial Philippines, no other material sourced from animals was as valued as ivory. The collection of Santos at the San Agustin Museum, like the gold collection of the Ayala Museum, is a treasure trove of objects that show a wealth of styles, origins, and forms, all which show how devout Filipinos visualized the saints and the Virgin. Esperanza Bunag Gatbonton, foremost Santos scholar, talks about the Filipino fascination for ivory, a fascination that has only grown more from the time when the material was plentiful and the trade was legal to the present when a worldwide consciousness regarding conservation is prevalent. While many still believe that the early Chinese carvers in the Philippines were the only ones capable of producing ivory santos, Gatbonton's research shows that Filipino carvers were also capable of producing fine carvings in this rare, imported material.
Sometime in 1590, the first bishop of the Philippines writes about ivory carvers, Chinese ivory carvers, here in Manila, carving the Niño Dormidos, the Christ in the manger that we normally have, which is very similar to the Buddhas that they have. However, we also have, long before mga 1530s, there were a lot of carvers in Goa. And they were doing small-scale carvings of ivory for personal use of the missionaries and for the churches in Goa. These were taken in as personal effects and sometimes commissioned for their churches here or somewhere else. It's not per se a trade, but a small-scale handling of, to fill the needs of certain missionary groups, religious groups, like they give gifts to the bishops in Spain, they would be sending, because ivory is precious. But in the Philippines, you have the first carvers in the Parian, of course, serving the needs of the local churches and the rich people. But if you read further on, for instance, in the Augustinian records, early period yan, in one of the footnotes of Father Rodriguez, this is the historian of the Augustinians, he says that from the very beginning of time, when they came here, side by side, working together in service of the church, were Filipinos and the Indios and the Chinese, side by side, working together in the service of the church.
In the grand processional images like these from the San Agustin collection, ivory heads and hands are mounted on wooden frames and then dressed in expensive fabrics, embroidered in gold and silver threads. Precious metals were also used for the halos, aureoles, and other symbols of divinity. In such santos, the work of many artisans came together. Sculptors, metal workers, goldsmiths, embroiderers, even encarnadores or painters, who would tint the ivory faces to make them look more realistic. Here is another way of looking at these processional images as a synthesis of many arts and crafts that Filipino artisans specialized in. All precious materials enhanced, made even more beautiful and lasting, testaments to a diversity of skills, of technologies, of faiths.
We have always treasured gold, metallurgically, because of its malleability. Gold can easily be shaped into many forms of jewelry, masks, and other kinds of crafts, and do not break easily simply because of its malleability. Pure silver, of course, does not also tarnish easily. That's why they have become prestige objects made of gold. Gold jewelry, silver jewelry, they have become very precious in our traditions. And Also, of course, their wide availability in our country was also a factor. We became a center for gold trade. You know, Filipinos were very skilled in crafting gold so that they became so fine. You hardly see the workmanship or us having been through some kind of labor. What you see is just almost perfect skill. We are able to wed many pebble-like small particles into one whole kind of texture. You hardly notice how they were made. And this is the reason why when you see the gold craft of our ancestors, especially from Butuan around the 10th century AD, you'll really be amazed at how they were able to make these things without the technology of today made by the machine, simply because of the perfection that you see in them.
Gold, silver, ivory, materials that continue to define our ideas of wealth, of status, of ostentation and display. But for our ancestors, there were undoubtedly deeper spiritual meanings to these materials and these objects. What we see as an extravagant display of natural material, our ancestors saw as only the very best offering to their deities. And for a craftsman, the very best work in the very best of materials was the only fitting gift to the divine. It is their skill, their endurance, their heritage of patience and perseverance that animates these objects and makes them embodiments of Dayaw, our knowledge, our pride.